Good noon, everybody. I'm Timmy Pierce, Executive Director of the Historical Society. And I thought today, being what today is, September 11th, that we might just take a moment. This is the anniversary of terrorist attacks that struck not only in New York, in Pennsylvania, and in Washington, but these attacks struck the very soul of our nation. And many people questioned, will we ever feel safe again? From this day in 2001, we learned beyond death and destruction, we learned of amazing acts of heroism, community, and consolation. Edna St. Vincent Millay wrote, following the death of a beloved, "Life goes on, I forget just why." So we all go on. Time will not erase that event in 2001, but life goes on. May we have just a few seconds of silence in memory and in tribute to those who lost their lives this day and to those for whom life has indeed gone on. Thank you. Well, we're going to take a big step back in time today to 1761, the beginnings of Crider's Church, which was created to serve the Lutherans of Eastern Frederick County. Louise Melliden will be tracing the history of the church from its beginnings in a log cabin shared with the German Reformed congregation to its role today in Carroll County. So without further ado, Louise Melliden.
Thank you, Timmy. St. Benjamin's formal history, apropos of our 250th anniversary in 2011, will be appearing shortly in the Carroll History Journal. We are delighted today to be able to share with you some of the anecdotes and nuances of our 250 years that did not survive the Historical Society's editor's pencils for the journal article. I will relate some of our early history to about 1890, and actually, Timmy, we may go back a smidge before 1761. Edna Eiler will take you through much of the 20th century, as well as share some of the highlights of the 120 years of service by our women's groups. Sandy Parker will feature some of our salient personalities over the years, and we will conclude with a little of our 250th anniversary celebrations. Marion Susky is our indispensable techie, having created and operating the PowerPoint. Our anniversary theme was "Great is Thy Faithfulness," from the hymn of that name, giving thanks to God for his faithful watch over our church throughout the centuries. Our church is just this side of the airport on Crider's Cemetery Road, not the red brick church at the end of Crider's Church Road, but the White Church just south of that church at the peak of the hill. Our 250th anniversary seal was displayed throughout our year-long anniversary events, showing the current church and adjoining Fellowship Sunday School Hall. To give you a preview of the evolution of our church buildings, here is a painting showing at the top our 1763 log church. This is an artist's rendition because we lack a photograph of that. In the second row left is our 1809 Union Church, quintessentially one of the brick Lutheran and Reformed Union churches of that era, which are virtually indistinguishable outside of their respective topographies. To its right is our current 1890 Queen Anne style church in its original incarnation. The bottom row shows the addition of the Sunday school wing and then the current fellowship hall wing. Arabelle Hefner Frock, wife of Daniel Stewart Frock, a direct descendant of one of the founding members of St. Benjamin's, painted these images of the church throughout the years. When the Protestant elector Karl II, governing the Palatine region on the Lower Rhine in what is now Germany, died without an heir in 1685, the Catholic Philip William of Neuburg succeeded him. The subsequent religious turmoil in the region prompted several waves of emigration to the British colonies in America. The shading on this map includes areas of German immigration from Halifax, Nova Scotia, to Georgia in the 18th century. The first wave, 1683 to 1710, arriving in Philadelphia, were recruited by William Penn and settled not far from the port where they had disembarked. The second wave, 1710 to 1727, settled primarily in southeast and south central Pennsylvania. This map illustrates the path taken by the settlers traveling from Philadelphia to the vicinity of Westminster. This third wave of immigrants, 1727 through 1776, traveled south to Maryland and even Virginia. The French and Indian War, raging west of the Monocacy, encouraged the settlers to stay east of that river. The possibility of double taxation by Pennsylvania and Maryland made settlement somewhat south of the then unsurveyed border between those two colonies prudent. The Lutheran and Reformed settlers steadfastly adhered to their respective doctrines, but recognized the economy of building joint churches. A coalition of Lutheran and Reformed worshipers in the Westminster area assembled on August 12, 1761, and determined to erect a joint church at a location proximate to the barns where they had been previously worshiping. Their joint church was originally known as the Church of Fife Creek. As there's a little confusion as to how we have that name and where is Fife Creek, I've traced at the bottom in the blue, Little Fife Creek, and at the top in the yellowish color, Big Pipe Creek. Little Pipe Creek originates just west of Westminster and runs southwest through the Wakefield Valley, just bypassing New Windsor, then through Union Bridge, named when the two sides of town joined to build a bridge over Little Pipe Creek. Then northwest to Bruceville. Big Pipe Creek has its source somewhat west of Manchester, thence west to turn south slightly east of Tawnytown, then south and then west to Bruceville, where it joins Little Pipe Creek. Both flow into the Monocacy at Double Pipe Creek Station. On April 14, 1763, the Lutheran and Reformed settlers worshiping in the Little Pipe Creek region met to draft the governing rules for their joint church. Here's the preamble, the whereas paragraph, and the pious statement of purpose in Article First, in the first article of those articles. This excerpt is the signature page bearing the names of many prominent early residents. In Article 7 of the Articles, the two congregations swore to bind themselves to each other with 100 pounds lawful currency and specified that either party acting against these articles and breaching the peace shall immediately pay the other party the aforesaid 100 pounds. These monies have remained in escrow for 250 years as the two churches have managed their coexistence and partial separation without breach of the peace. Later, in 1763, the two congregations dedicated their first joint church, a 1.5-story log structure. A log sexton's house was erected shortly thereafter. Even before the building of the joint church at Pipe Creek, several of the fledgling Lutheran congregations in Philadelphia had written to the mother country for a pastor to guide the various congregations in the Mid-Atlantic region. The Franke Foundations in Germany sent Reverend Henry Melchior Muhlenberg. He assembled the scattered Lutheran congregations from New York to Georgia and convened the Ministerium of Pennsylvania, the first permanent Lutheran synod in America. Reverend Muhlenberg drafted the 1748 liturgy used in Dutch and Swedish, as well as German Lutheran churches for over a century, and which continues to influence the liturgy in American churches. Here are an exterior and an interior showing the pulpit of Reverend Muhlenberg's home church in Pennsylvania, where he is buried. Reverend Muhlenberg's children carried on his tradition of service. One son became a major general in the Continental Army during the War of Independence. Two were elected to Congress, one of whom became the first Speaker of the House of Representatives. Another became a pastor, another a scientist who became president of Franklin and Marshall College. A grandson was elected governor of Pennsylvania. St. Benjamin's first minister was Carl Friedrich Wunderbaum. He had been a catechist in Winchester, Virginia, but relocated to Hanover, Pennsylvania in 1763 as a result of savage Indian attacks in Winchester. His parish extended from Hagerstown to Sharpsburg and comprised 13 congregations, which he served on horseback. Our first book of church records, 1767 to 1837, was recorded in German, translated in 1935. The communion rolls reflect the traditional confession before receiving the sacrament, as evidenced by this June 12, 1791 communion roll, showing that communicants number 90 and 91 down there at the bottom right had been ordered to do penance at the Firmholz before receiving the sacrament. By 1809, the two congregations had outgrown their original log church. They raised it and built their new two-story brick church, the cost of which was funded by a lottery, a common technique at that time. The logs from the original 1763 church were used to build a residence at 114 East Main Street, which still stands today and is currently a professional office. This interior of the 1809 church includes a stove with heating pipes and kerosene lamps, in addition to some of the furnishings to which we are accustomed. This map shows Carroll County's first Lutheran church, Emmanuel Manchester, the purple dot, together with several of the churches to which St. Benjamin was the mother. St. Benjamin's, the blue dot, St. Mary's, red, Boss, green, and St. Luke's, yellow. By the 1840s, enough ministers had followed the Reverends Muhlenberg and Wunderbaum that the charge, including St. Benjamin's, was down to 4 churches: St. Benjamin's, Boss, St. Mary's, Silver Run, and St. Luke's, Winters. With the founding of St. John's Leicester in 1844 and then Grace Westminster in 1868, the charge again became unwieldy. Reverend Philip Willard sometimes preached 5 times a Sunday, 3 times in English and twice in German. In 1869, the charge was divided, with Boss and St. Luke's joining Mount Union to form a new charge, and St. Benjamin's, St. John's, and Grace remaining the Westminster charge. In 1886, the Westminster charge was again divided, with Grace remaining the Westminster charge and St. Benjamin's and St. John's becoming the new Salem charge. On April 9th, 1883, at 11:30 p.m., an alarm of fire was reported at Jacob Thompson's livery stable on John Street. The wind was blowing strongly and the fire spread rapidly. Westminster had no water supply except private wells and cisterns. The president of the fire company immediately telegraphed to Baltimore for assistance. The fire sped rapidly up Main Street and soon reached Carroll Street. Grace Lutheran Church and parsonage were destroyed, and as demonstrated in this slide, only parts of the exterior walls of Grace Church were spared. Many early records of St. Benjamin stored in the joint parsonage with Grace were destroyed, hence the brevity of my account of our first 130 years. In 1889, lightning struck the 1809 brick Union Church, making it unsafe for further worship. The salvageable materials from the joint church were equally divided between the two congregations. Edna picks up our story from here.
And so they decided to each have a church, since the Lutherans had outgrown the space. Milton Schaeffer sold 2.5 acres to the Lutherans for $500, onto which to build a church. The German Reformed congregation secured an acre of land from G.W. Hall for $200 for their church site. Both of these lots were near the damaged church. A newspaper account at the time deemed the two purchases were wise moves made by both churches, because occasionally the services of one congregation would interfere with a funeral or service being planned by the other congregation. The dependence on a traveling minister also had to be considered. According to a local newspaper in 1891, the consecration services for St. Benjamin's new church were witnessed by a large congregation, notwithstanding the threatening rain of the early morning and exceedingly muddy roads. 3 local Lutheran ministers attended, as well as Reverend S.W. Owings of Hagerstown, Maryland, who preached an admirable sermon. The new Lutheran church was built in the Queen Anne style, and the cornerstone from the old church was laid on July 15, 1891. The main auditorium was 40 feet by 48 feet, with a Sunday school wing which increased the width of the building to 70 feet. The interior was finished in hardwood. The windows were of stained glass and were represented by members and friends of the congregation. The total cost of the church, including the $500 for the land, insurance, chandeliers, carpeting, frescoing, etc., was approximately $5,400. Of this amount, $236.63 was earned and gathered by the ladies of the church under the direction of the Ladies' Aid Society. Their donation carpeted the entire church, purchased 2 Bailey reflector chandeliers, a pulpit, Bible, reading stand, and 12 choir chairs. After deducting pledges, collections at the laying of the cornerstone, donations, and money received from selling bricks and other materials from the damaged Crowder's building, the indebtedness on the morning of the dedication was $2,689.59. By the hearty response of members and friends, $2,200 of this amount was raised with little difficulty. The cornerstone from the damaged church is placed along our present-day handicap ramp to the church. The curse stone from the Union Church was placed over the doorway of Crowder's Reformed Church, where it still remains. During construction, church services were held at Moorlock Schoolhouse on Uniontown Road. On May 25, 1875, a bell weighing 710 pounds was purchased and installed in the Lutheran Tower. 16 members of the congregation, as well as Reverend S.A. Deal, toted the bell up to the tower. In 1926, during the tenure of Reverend R.S. Patterson, the basement was enlarged for a social room and kitchen. Then around 1940, the basement was deepened. The basement work was dug by hand. Dirt was hauled out in wheelbarrows by church members. My Uncle Sterling Young spent many hours on that task. The only entrance to the basement was at the back of the church. The original 3 arches at the altar area had printed words. In this 1910 photo of Reverend Doty, the center arch displayed the words, "The Lord is in his holy temple." Note on the left the pump organ in the choir area, and over the altar there are 3 windows. In later years, the arches were stenciled with a pattern instead of words. For 60 years, the church's exterior continued to look much as it had on Dedication Day in 1891. There was an exterior double door with a porch on each side of the church. In the original Sunday school wing, the children under the age of 12 met for class. A small room, which is now a hallway to the fellowship hall, was used for Sunday school for the young teens, ages 12 to 16. 4 other classes, including the ladies' Bible class, the Gleaners for young women, the men's Bible class, and the Willing Workers for young men, met in separate corners of the sanctuary. On the left picture, the windows over the altar have been replaced with grillwork associated with the placement of the organ chamber built on the back of the church in 1938. In our other picture, you notice that the grid work over the altar has been covered with a docile curtain. And our third picture, this shows our new front door to the narthex, made during the building renovations begun in 1950. The Lutheran Church Women of St. Benjamin's Lutheran Church was organized on April 24, 1892, by Reverend S.A. Deal. At that time, it was known as the Young People's Home and Foreign Missionary Society. Mrs. Deal was the first president. Meetings in early times were held after the Sunday worship service. There were 15 active members, both men and women, who paid dues of 5 cents each month. With these dues, members were able to send a relief box to India. In 1894, the Women's Aid Society paid to have a well dug at the church and a pump installed. This cost them $65. They raised money by putting on plays in the hall at Frizzleburg, providing food stands at public auctions, or through the sales of clothespins and other items. In more recent years, the president and women of the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America raised money selling greeting cards and vanilla extract. In the mid-1990s, sale yards became a major form of fundraising. As a service to others, the women served meals to groups, canned peaches for the Lutheran home in Washington, D.C., and provided food to the Deaconess Home in Baltimore County, thanks to the Harvest Home donations. Over the years, the organization's name has changed many times, but members of the group still conduct regular meetings, visit shut-ins, and donate money and time to the church, community, and other needs across the world. My Young and Starner relatives were very active in this group before the 1900s and have continued to be. Reverend and Mrs. J.A. Deal were an active team. In addition to feats of strength and helping to install the bell in the tower, he also organized, as I mentioned, the Young People's Home and Foreign Missionary Society. 150 new church members joined St. Benjamin's during his 11-year tenure, from December 1891 through April 1902. And Reverend Doty added 212 members into the church between 1902 and 1912. Note the clothing style of his wife and child. Reverend J.E. McDonald served from June 1930 to December 1941. In 1936, he helped our church celebrate its 175th anniversary. During his tenure, a Moeller reconditioned pipe organ was dedicated in May 1938. The total cost, including the newly built organ chamber, was $2,157. In 1939, the first oil burner was installed at a cost of $795. When the Salem Charge was formed, which consisted of St. Benjamin's and St. John's Lutheran churches, a new parsonage was needed. This was after Grace Lutheran became the Westminster Charge. On August 2, 1887, The trustees of St. Benjamin's and St. John's congregations bought a lot on Pennsylvania Avenue in Westminster for $400 on which to erect a parsonage. Work was started at once and so earnestly pushed that by the 12th of December, the house was finished at a cost of $2,436.35. This home had been lived in continuously by the ministers and their families of Salem Parish until 1983. In recent years, the garden gate from the parsonage was installed in our present biblical garden, located along the handicapped ramp to the church. It is close to the 1809 cornerstone. Reverend Willis R. Berneman served as the minister from 1942 until 1963. During his first year, a monthly parish paper called the Salem Herald was started. Pulpit and choir gowns were introduced. New Sunday school hymnals were purchased. A brotherhood was organized. Weekly service bulletins were introduced, and Sunday school classes were moved to the lower level of the church. He guided the congregation through a very tough financial situation. Then in 1950, extensive building renovations began. The building was extended approximately 25 feet, forming a narthex and increasing the seating capacity to 275. New hardwood floors were installed, and a soundproof room was created above the narthex so that young mothers and their young children could see the service but not cause an interruption. Fundraising among members began, and 3 bequests totaling almost $33,000 became the seeds of an endowment at his request. He was our longest-serving minister. In November 1970, Reverend Brenneman was made pastor emeritus of Salem Parish. Seen here is the serviceman's record book, which was kept by Pastor Brenneman with updated entries as deployments changed. This enabled him to connect with the servicemen. And in our church, a service banner was displayed, with each star representing a serviceman. Reverend Brenneman faithfully kept in touch through letters with each serviceman in the Salem Parish. In the July-August Salem Herald, there were 40 men listed. Perhaps the oldest burial ground in the county, our joint cemetery where the log and brick churches had stood, is still maintained by both Criders Lutheran and Criders Reformed churches. The newly laid out cemetery began interments in 1763. The first funeral in the church and the first burial in the cemetery was J. Schaefer, a relative of Sherry Schaefer Haynes, who is a current member of our church. The inscriptions on the earliest stones are in German. In our Lutheran and joint cemetery are veterans of the American Revolution, veterans of the War of 1812, Civil War veterans, and World War II veterans who were members of St. Benjamin's. Our original church site, in conjunction with the bicentennial of our nation on Sunday, September 19, 1976, and the church's 250th anniversary celebration, a monument was erected marking the site of the original Criders Union Church. A service of unveiling, blessing, and dedication of the monument was held. Hands across the years of time was the thought expressed in this service, symbolizing the bond of Christian love that has existed between the people and pastors of the congregation since 1761. And Sandy will take us more into the future.
So far, we have shared the history and the development of St. Ben's through a story of events and buildings. But the real treasures we discovered relates to the people of St. Ben's, to their memories and their deeds, peoples and steeples. A church is not a building. It's a body of people. Folks who faithfully worship within and without its walls year after year. Yes, for 250 years. Some members of St. Ben's today can trace their families back to the original foundries, shown here in this family tree of Lorenz Formwalt. There are 8 generations of families from Lorenz Formwalt. We indicated in red 12 of the present worshipers today from our church who are members of this tree, including Louise Young Millidan and Edna Young Eiler. On September of 1985, we celebrated a Heritage Day to recognize 50-year membership of St. Benjamin's Lutheran Church by baptism or confirmation. As you can see, our list numbered 61 members. And in 2013, we will celebrate another Heritage Day. Research shows some life members of 90 years now. Our early German church communion records show an interesting name as a worshiper in the Union Church, highlighted in number 24. Her name, Maria Elizabeth Sherman, wife of Jacob, who at one time owned the lots in Westminster that stretch from present Court Street to Longwell Avenue. He originally came from Germany, then moved through and lived in Littlestown for a while, and then came to be a part of the old Main Court Inn. He reportedly had a house built across the street for his daughter Eve and her husband David Shriver. And in 1807, records show the family living with the Shermans in the house, known now as, anybody? The Sherman Fisher Shellman House, part of the Historical Society complex. That's right. We cannot relate all the names of St. Ben's from 250 years, and we know we're in danger of missing a few. But this just gives you an idea of some of the names and some of the folks from our congregation who have been very busy. We have collected some stories and memories to share, which illustrate the treasures, the folks of the church. Meet Mrs. George Marker. A large frame certificate was discovered, tucked away in the church's archive room. It was issued to Mrs. Marker in 1969 or 70 by the governor of the state of Maryland on the occasion of her 103rd birthday. We contacted a family member in Louisiana and returned the certificate to them. Interesting sidelight, we did not know her first name. It was Mrs. George Marker on the certificate until we found her gravestone, Elizabeth Marker. Meet Mrs. Ida Petrie Lease, the organist of our church for 42 years. Paula Crow Schwartzman, granddaughter and present member of St. Ben's, is shown here on the lap of her grandmother in Mrs. Lease in 1948. Paula shared with us many special memories of the choir when her mother, Mary Lease Crow, was choir director, and you see Mary and Mrs. Lease together there in that photograph. Mary Crow is remembered for her beautiful soprano voice and served as the choir director for over 40 years. Paula's family is shown in this choir picture, showing the mother, the grandmother, and the grandfather, all a family part of the service. Kathy Frock Krause shared a memory as being a member of the children's choir and of singing A Shaky Silent Night at the candlelight service when the children stood on boxes and ladders to form a wobbly Christmas tree. Mrs. Lease was not only our faithful organist, but also found the first pipe organ for our church in 1938. She located it in a movie theater in Waynesboro, Pennsylvania. It was purchased, reconditioned, and installed for about $2,000. Prior to that, a foot pedal organ of the 1913-14 era was used. And in 1978, much excitement a new Moeller organ was introduced. The organ was a classic design depicting the period of the Lutheran Reformation, with 653 pipes, some 9 feet tall and some as short as a pencil. The pipes were installed behind and above the altar, cost about $38,000. Now, meet John Schweigert, another member of St. Ben's who loved music and contributed his musical and other talents to the church. We discovered his story in a file cabinet, again in our archive storage. He organized his life for the Heritage Day using the Bible. Part 1 begins, Genesis, born 1895. His musical interests included playing the violin and the cornet at St. Ben's, also at the First English Lutheran Church in Baltimore, Grace in Westminster, and the Union Church Balboa in the Canal Zone, where he worked for a while. From 1912 to 14, he played either violin or cornet with the organist, Mrs. Marjorie Yingling, every Sunday. Mr. John spent 11 years in the Panama Canal Zone. When he returned to Westminster, he was very active in all aspects of our church, particularly with the finances, as the treasurer of the newly created investment fund. Mr. John's love of music carried over into the community with his participation in the Westminster Band. Isabel Frock Arball remembers Mr. John leading the band at the St. Ben's Strawberry Festivals. Jean White, a present band member, remembers Mr. John. He shared this calendar picture with us with a possible ID of Mr. John on the first row, right corner. Meet Marie Kaufman Kuntz, an active member for many years, participating in the women's groups, acting as a Sunday school teacher. An account she wrote in a 1985 Advent book entitled Quiet, Waiting, and Longing, Memories and Traditions, tells of early Christmas celebrations at St. Ben's. A 1911 account of traveling to the Christmas program, rehearsals by horse and buggy, or walking to church. In winter, using sleighs and bobsleds. Quote, "My father would hook 2 horses to the bobsled, fill the bottom of the sled with straw and blankets. We would all climb in and bundle up under the blankets. We would drive to town to pick up the organist, Miss Marjorie Yingling, and others along the way. We had to go through a toll gate on Pennsylvania Avenue and pay a toll based on the number of horses you were driving." Meet Mary Hall, activist, early champion of women's rights. Folks tell of her campaigns to urge everyone to vote at election time. Mary would be very busy right now. She urged everyone to vote in the federal, state, and local elections. There are many good Mary stories we don't have time to tell you about, but the Brems just told me a couple minutes ago before we started. Meet Catherine and Homer Myers. Catherine was the first woman to serve in our church council, 1972. She was a teacher in Carroll County Schools, a director of plays and pageants at schools, at church, including the 225th production of A Mind to Work. Homer was president of Stuller Construction and responsible for the design and construction of the current sanctuary, as well as Macklin Lounge and the education building. Meet Judy and Pastor Albert Macklin, another special team as Pastor and Mrs. Deal. Pastor Macklin came in 1964 after Pastor Brenneman retired. This was his second career, first having been an educator and serving in World War II in the 8th Army Air Corps in England. He was the pastor of the Salem Parish, covering both St. Ben's and St. John's. Pastor Macklin is remembered as being very active in growing the church family. He enjoyed singing and was loved for his quiet, fatherly manner. He served the parish for 17 years, dying suddenly in 1981. Jewel, was also active and revered at St. Ben's. She wrote the play telling the story of the 225 years of St. Ben's, A Mind to Work. She also wrote an account of the life of Katie and Martin Luther. Judy taught a very well-attended adult Sunday school class. She covered many topics, from Lutheran doctrine to discussions of other religions and cultures. She was a supervisor of special education in the Carroll County schools. The Macklins are also remembered for their hospitality at the parsonage on Pennsylvania Avenue. Judy's delicious food was an incentive for the youthful members of the live nativity tableaus held at the parsonage during Christmas seasons, according to participant Linda Eiler. The Macklins were the last family of the Salem parish to live in the parsonage. In 1982, after Pastor Macklin's sudden death, both churches decided to choose their own pastor. Meet Pastor Ron Reeves, who became our first St. Ben's only pastor in 1983. He was well known for his puppet ministries, loved by adults and children. He was also gifted in music, art, and writing. When he left to answer a call from the Frederick Church, we found a young pastor serving in Alexandria, Virginia. He arrived with his wife Lexi in 1995. Pastor David Schaefer has been our spiritual leader for 16 years and continues today. So many memories and folks have contributed to the life and history of St. Ben's 250 years. Our challenge now is to continue and to move forward. Gone are the forests and the fields of 1761, replaced by more homes, roads, and people. We tried to open our doors to the community needs and events, as we did when Montessori became a part of our setting for 26 years. With headmistress Nancy Title to guide the students during the week, and the same area used by our Sunday school students on Sundays, we shared and compromised. Montessori built a new school and moved to its own building in 2001. And Carroll Lutheran School arrived at St. Ben's. The Lutheran churches of the Westminster Conference teamed up to support, pray, and organize the school, similar to the efforts that had been made years ago in creating Carroll Lutheran Village. The Carroll Lutheran School recently celebrated 10 years of existence and is now in its own facility. Our Boy Scout troop, 2007, is also a proud aspect of St. Ben's today. We have been involved in many Eagle Scout projects. The live nativity, presented annually the past few years, has given us an opportunity to share the Christmas story with the community. Revived from the days of the Salem parsonage tableaus by John Schiller and Company, with Bunky the donkey, assorted goats, sheep, and cows, we all rejoice with Silent Night. St. Benjamin's Lutheran Church, reaching out with our neighbors, the Ark and the New Life for Girls, going forward to create more memories for the next 50, 100, or 200 years.
We celebrated our 250th anniversary throughout 2011 with an historic service from a different era on the second Sunday of each month, a series of special activities and monthly displays of materials from our archives and our members' homes. Here is a brochure of anniversary events showing previews of the Hayride Top Center held at our Fall Apple Festival, Our Memorial Day Cemetery Walk, bottom center, honoring our veterans going back to the Revolutionary War. Note the photo to the right of the colors, the bottom right corner, showing members arriving at the Union Church by horse and buggy. Our display case, including photographs of early ministers, antique Bibles and hymnals, and a silver communion tray. The first of our monthly displays featuring early exterior and interior photographs of the church over the years and baptismal and confirmation certificates, many of which have been preserved in Edna's family archives. My great-grandmother's, Edna's grandmother's, 1871 Bible with German table of contents lying on the cover. The Bible itself, including table of contents, is in English. This was the month for the Sunday school display, showing the altar vases in the back center there on the Sunday school offer, and just in front of them, the offering barrel used then to take up the offering during Sunday school. This is the program from our January historic service, which used the 1748 Muhlenberg liturgy. The choir sang the anthem in German. All the monthly historic services were researched and prepared by our organist, Cindy Baxter, who is this fall starting herself at Gettysburg Seminary. Here is a historic note Cindy included in our January bulletin describing Lutheran worship in the Mid-Atlantic from the 1730s to the eve of the Revolutionary War. The March historic service, for which we used the 1880 book of worship and tunes. On that Sunday, we welcomed back former members and friends who had moved away, and many turned up to join in the Victorian service. This is my cousin Linda Wagner in Victorian style attire, which she made for the occasion. In October, we had our formal anniversary service and party, and presiding bishop of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, Mark Hansen, is shown here preaching at our October celebratory service on Reformation Sunday. Bishop Wolfgang Hertz Lang of the Delaware Maryland Synod was the presiding minister that day. We buried a time capsule in our Remembrance Garden this past February. This slide itemizes the various anniversary items placed inside. We've seen the brochure a little at the beginning of my talk about the anniversary. We had the invitation to our gala banquet, which we held at the Great Western, and the bulletins for the historic services on the second Sunday that I mentioned. The women of the ELCA's 2011 program, local press coverage. Aside from that nice picture of Linda in her Victorian dress, we had coverage for the Memorial Day, and we had some coverage of the original January service and a nice article by Mimi Ashcroft. Thank you for your interest in St. Benjamin's, or at least for your having made the BLT your lunchtime diversion of choice. We've enjoyed sharing and hope you're taking away some insights and information. I think we have a few minutes left if anyone has questions or there are other items that you'd like us to tell you what we know. Mimi.
Where was track where Muhlenberg is buried?
Oh, I don't know. Pastor David knows.
Northwest of Philadelphia.
That was absolutely fulsome. Thank you so much. And thanks, as always, to Marilyn Phillips, Chair of the Programs Committee, to Kathy Beatty, who staffs, and to, of course, the Community Media Center. So this is now part of another legacy in a different format for the future. I think it would be an awfully good idea if Pastor Dave stood up and was recognized. Thanks again, and safe home, everybody.